As someone who enjoys making her life harder by trying to speak and learn different languages and then trying to explain what I mean in these different languages, this feeling of frustration is very familiar. This feeling when you want to say it in the language that you're learning, but by the time it comes out, they just vanish because I spend way too much time and too much energy trying to translate it in my head. So if this feeling is very much familiar to you, then you are in the right place, and let's talk about it. So this habit of always translating from your native language to the language that you're learning, it's not so much a bad habit. This is a habit that we built when we started learning this language as a beginner. If you're learning English as a beginner, this is something that is very natural to you because as a beginner, the only way for you to understand and to speak in the second language is through translation. And it's completely natural. So I just want to say that this translation habit is not broken. It's natural, but it's outdated. Once you get to the stage where you're intermediate level, you understand a lot of things, but then something just seems to block you from saying things out loud and fluently in their second language, then this is the right place for you. So the first step for you is that you need to be aware of this habit that you're doing. Because a lot of people, they're doing this habit without actually knowing it. So the first time that I noticed that I was still doing this habit was that I was trying to speak French with some French people, and I was trying to explain that, I like oysters and I really enjoy eating them, but in Bali there aren't that many places that sell them as good or like as cheap as they sell it in France. So it is a very basic idea, right? And then I know enough French to be able to string string words together to convey that idea. But at the moment, as I was trying to explain it, I noticed that I took way too long. I took longer than I wanted. And luckily, the French people that I was speaking to, they were quite patient because they knew that French was not my first or my second language. But then I really noticed that I don't like this. I don't like to have people wait for me while I'm kind of like organizing my thought. And that's when I noticed, oh my God, I'm still translating. This is such an inefficient way for me to speak French. So that's when I noticed. And maybe you also have a similar experience when you're trying to speak English, but you notice that you took way too long, and that's because you translate. So definitely share your version in the comments below. And at this point, I really thought like, oh my God, this is not gonna work. I have learned French for almost a decade now, so I should be able to say things out loud without thinking too much. So that's when I decided that, okay, I need to unlearn this translation habit that I picked up from when I was still a beginner. And this is a very normal mechanism. This happens in your second language, your third, or your fourth, and it's just, sometimes it never fully disappears, but you can definitely do a lot of things to try to get rid of this habit. So what do we want to do? So at this point, what we want to do is to build a direct pathway between your thoughts and the second language, between what you want to say and the language that you're learning. So think about it like this. Imagine that there are two pathways in your brain that connects your thoughts into the languages that you speak. So the pathway between your brain, between your thoughts and your native language is very wide and it's very well paved. Why is that? Because you spend your entire life thinking and speaking and learning in your native language. So that path is very wide, is smooth, and is very thick. It's very easy to walk across. But then there's also this pathway that is still very thin, not well developed, not well paved between your thoughts and English, the language that you're learning. So that path is barely used, is very thin, and it's not very easy to walk on this path. And what we want to do is to use this path often enough to the point that it becomes easier to become for it to become well paved and more natural for you. And of course, you will always default to the easier path between your thoughts and the native language because we're humans and we always take the path with the least resistance. But now what we want to do is to use this thin path enough time so that this becomes a lot easier for us to start using, so that this becomes an easy one as well. So how do we do that? Basically, this is what happens when people tell you to start thinking in English. So the thing is, a lot of the advice that we see out there is that we want to start thinking and associating objects in English. And that is a great first start. For instance, like you see an object, a cat, and instead of thinking about it in your first language, like kucing or gato or sha, you think of it just cat, and then imagine the image cat. So you want to build a direct association, right? So that is a great start. So this is a great start if you want to improve your English for a day-to-day, like a daily basis. But if your goal is to build that fluency at work or in a more serious, higher level setting, this habit is not enough. We need to go up a level above that. So narrating your day or labeling objects, it really does help, but it's low stakes. It doesn't really train that pathway under pressure, like real conversations or meetings and all of that, and this is what we want. So what are the things that we can do to strengthen the thin path? What can we do to make that path wider and easier to walk on? So this all has to happen under the premise that you already get a lot of massive input in English. If at this point you haven't surrounded yourself enough with English or any language that you're learning, you have to start doing that. So this is something that I really push and really endorse in my videos. You have to really consume English content, real, native, authentic English content every single day. It has to become like second skin to you. So that is the first thing that you need to do to strengthen this path. Consuming massive input does two things almost automatically. The more you do it, the more natural this becomes, and also at one point you're gonna start having this I get it feeling. So for instance, right now I am reading a fiction in Spanish before bed, and then sometimes it does get a little bit annoying because I don't always understand every single sentences or every single point that the book is saying, but there are many times where I'm starting to feel that I read a paragraph and then I just get it. I don't get necessarily all of the words that they use to describe something, but I just understand it. Something inside me just thinks, okay, I understand what it means, I understand what is happening. So you can only get this feeling the more you expose yourself to native content. It's this feeling when you already understand without having to do the translation work. And the second reason why getting a lot of massive input is important, is absolutely necessary, is it also because sometimes it will give you this surprise retrieval moment where you... Tofu mau apa sih? Tofu mau apa? Hah? Tofu? Kamu mau keluar ya? So the surprise retrieval moment is a moment where you just use the right word, the right phrase in the right situation involuntarily, without you even thinking about it. You didn't have to search for it, you didn't have to translate it, it just comes out involuntarily, and this is a proof that it's working. It's working because you have fed your brain enough materials, and then your brain just uses it the moment you need it. So these are two things that could happen once you feed your brain enough input, massive input, where you just have this intuitive feeling of understanding, of like getting it, and also the surprise retrieval moment where you involuntarily use the right words or phrases to describe yourself without you actually having to do the translation or the searching. So that is the first step that you have to do if you haven't done it already. Feed your brain enough input in the language that you are learning. But you don't want to only... Tofu? However, input alone is not enough. You've done the first step, you've fed your brain enough input, but you cannot fully rely on just consumption to be able to start producing the language more naturally. You actually have to push yourself to train the output skills, which is the speaking skills, the producing skills. You want to start training your output skills under mild pressure, and we can do this through vlogging, to actually recording yourself speak about a certain topic that you're not super comfortable about, and because then this gives you that mild pressure. So this is just a little bit more challenging than having to narrate your day or associating objects to English words. At this stage, when you're vlogging, what you want to do is to challenge yourself to speak about topics that is just a little bit outside of your comfort zone, topics that you have never talked about before, topics that is directly relevant to what you are using in your day-to-day. And sometimes, if you're honest with yourself, these are topics that you kind of avoid because you know that it's challenging, and if you start talking about this out loud in front of the camera, you're just gonna get uncomfortable with it and you even cringe a little bit. But if this sounds a little bit too much pressure for you, you can actually start even milder. You can start talking about things that you already know very well, so that your bandwidth doesn't really go into the content because you understand the content pretty well. So let your limited available bandwidth go into producing the language than the content. So now just think about a topic that you know very well. Let's say you are very passionate about cooking or about cats, or let's say about how AI is taking over everybody's job these days. If you really feel so passionate about it, talk about it in English, and if you've never done that already. That will be the first step. And once you feel like you feel comfortable talking about it and you're very happy with how you feel, and then graduate a level above that and talk about things that you are not super passionate in but slightly knowledgeable in. And then the third one that you have to do, this is one habit that you want to start to get into when you are practicing on your own, is to interrupt yourself when you start catching yourself going back into the translation mode. How do you catch yourself? So you want to catch yourself in a moment where, let's say you're trying to speak about it in English, but then you're starting to hesitate about what the language about the word is in English, and your normal self would want to go straight into the translation mode. Oh, in my native language this is the word, so in English it would be this and that. So you want to catch yourself in that moment, and instead of actually saying it in English, a translated version, push yourself to explain it in English in a more indirect way. Find a different way to explain that in English instead of thinking about the translated version. So basically, this is when you catch it as it's happening and then you stop yourself from finishing that translation route. So if you think about that pathway visual in your brain that we talked about earlier, is that once you find yourself wanting to take that easy way out, stop yourself and then push yourself to take on that thinner path. And again, the more you do that, the wider and the more developed that pathway is, which is what we want to do. And you will probably be thinking to yourself, I think I'm doing it wrong because it's taking me longer and slower to say the word. But this feeling of discomfort is exactly how you're feeling when you're taking that thinner path in your brain. So this is when the training is actually happening in real time. So this is absolutely necessary. So you want to embrace this feeling of discomfort, especially if you are practicing with yourself on your own at home. If you do not feel the discomfort and then you just succumb to this feeling of easiness, it's just, you know what, let me just use the well-paved translation path, then you're not really training anything new. So you just want to lean into this feeling of discomfort because that is when the training in your brain, in your habit, is happening. However, if you already find yourself doing the translated version, then you don't have to go back, pedal back and correct yourself. What you can do is to do another practice session. Let's say put your camera or your phone on again and then try to redo it again with the less well-paved road. However, if you find yourself just translating it because you're doing it out of habit, it's okay. It takes a while for you to unlearn a habit that you have been doing all your life. But once when you are doing your practice session, you just want to push yourself to feel the discomfort, and the discomfort is not discomfort, and the slowness of it while you're doing it is not a sign of failure. It's just a sign that you're actually pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So well done. So those are the 3 things that you can do to start training your brain and training yourself to start thinking immediately in the language instead of having to go through this filter of your native language. What you want to do basically is think about making that path between your thoughts and English a lot wider, and it may be a messy path to do that. But once you get to the point where you just speak without thinking and then the right words and the right phrases just come out, or you just understand what is being said without having to do this mental translation all the time, that's when you know it's working. So thank you so much for watching this video until the end. I hope that you get something out of it and you can already start implementing this once you turn off this video. So share with me in the comment if you've been doing this or if you've experienced this before, and I will see you next time on the video. Until then, take care and bye-bye.